Richard had signed billion-dollar deals without blinking. Yet on the night he lost everything, it was a stranger girl's soft voice that stopped him from disappearing into the darkness forever. Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome to Ms. Love Stories channel, the place where love, drama, and unforgettable moments come alive. I'm so thrilled you're here, ready to dive into stories that will make your heart race, bring tears, and leave you believing in the power of love. Before we begin, I want to get to know all of you. Comment below and tell me where you're watching from, because in the next video, I'll give a special shout out to some of you amazing viewers from around the world. I can't wait to see how far our love story family reaches. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell, so you never miss a single emotional journey. Get ready to feel, laugh, cry, and fall in love all over again, because every story we share here is for you. Now, the story begins. Rose. The city shimmered beneath him like a sheet of scattered diamonds. From the top floor of the Harrington Tower, where the clouds kissed the sharp edges of glass, Richard Hale stood frozen before the floor-to-ceiling window. His reflection stared back. Crisp suit, controlled posture, the cold dignity of a man who built an empire from dust. But if anyone looked closely enough, past the tailored exterior, past the flawless facade, they would notice the truth. His eyes weren't cold. They were tired. He rubbed them slowly, fighting the headache that had pulsed behind his temples for weeks. The board meeting had just ended. His primary investor, his longtime friend, had avoided looking him in the eye again. Papers had gone missing. Audit questions had multiplied. There were whispers in hallways when he walked past. And the one thing Richard hated more than betrayal was not knowing who was orchestrating it. A soft knock came on the glass door behind him. "Sir?" his assistant whispered, her voice cautious. "It's almost midnight. You should get some rest." Rest. Almost laughable. Richard nodded once, dismissively but not unkindly, and turned away from the window. The office, polished and immaculate, suddenly felt like a museum of a man he no longer recognized. On his desk, a silver frame held a photo. His younger self, smiling beside the people he once called family. He lifted it, thumb brushing over the edge. He returned it face down. He didn't sleep anymore. Not well, at least. Power had a cost, and he had paid for it with isolation. Maybe this is why they're turning on me, he thought quietly. I stopped trusting them before they stopped trusting me. He grabbed his coat. As he opened the office door, the night wind from the elevator shaft swept in, sharp and cold. It layered over his unease like frost on glass. Across the city, in a cramped little apartment above a laundromat, Mary Bennett stood on a stool, reaching up to fix the flickering light bulb in her kitchen. "Again. Please," she whispered to it. "Just last until Friday." The bulb buzzed, flickered, then miraculously stayed lit. Mary smiled. "Thank you." Her apron still smelled faintly of dish soap from her shift at the diner. She had been on her feet for 11 hours. Her hair was messy from rushing between tables. Her body ached, but she moved through the small kitchen as though she carried sunlight in her bones. She checked on the elderly woman next door through the connecting window, as she always did. Mrs. Ramos sat asleep in her rocking chair, TV humming softly. Mary made a mental note to bring her dinner tomorrow. She could have collapsed on her tiny couch. But instead, she pulled out a notebook and wrote, "Don't forget to bring extra blanket for Mrs. Ramos. Double shift on Thursday. Return library book. Check on the stray cat behind the diner." Her life was simple, heavy sometimes, but filled with small acts of tenderness. Still, when the apartment grew quiet, loneliness floated around her like dust. She avoided looking at her phone, at the unread messages from the person who had left her years ago, only to reappear when they needed something. Opening those would only bruise her heart again. Love, to Mary, was a story meant for other people. She tied her hair into a messy bun and prepared tea before bed. Outside her small window, the glow of the city lights made the sky look warmer than it felt. She wiped the condensation from the glass with her palm. "Somewhere out there," she whispered. "Someone's having the worst night of their life, and they don't even know help is coming." She didn't know she was describing Richard. She didn't know their lives were inching toward each other like two strangers walking toward the same corner. She didn't know she was about to change a billionaire's life forever. Richard stepped out of the tower and into the quiet night. The air tasted of approaching rain, heavy and metallic. His driver wasn't there, strange. The streetlights flickered. He walked. Something in his chest felt tight. A strange combination of fear and intuition whispered inside him. Something is coming. Something big. He passed by closed shops and the smell of fresh bread lingering from a bakery that had shut an hour ago. His phone buzzed with new emails. More accusations, more complications, more knots tightening around his life. He ignored them. For a man who lived online, connected to everything, he suddenly wanted to disappear. Across the street, the late-night diner where Mary worked flicked off its neon sign. She stepped outside, arms wrapped around herself against the wind. Her steps were slow, exhausted, but steady. She didn't see Richard passing. He didn't see her either. Not yet. But fate had a way of circling people around each other, drawing them closer and closer until there was no space left to ignore. A car sped by, splashing water from a broken hydrant onto Richard's expensive shoes. He exhaled sharply, half irritation, half defeat. He had never felt smaller. A man who once signed deals worth billions, now soaked, alone, and pacing a street at midnight with no destination. If anyone from the media saw him now. "Sir." Someone called faintly behind him. Richard turned. Mary stood near the diner door, a small takeaway bag in her hand. He had dropped his wallet without noticing. "You left this," she said gently, holding his leather wallet up between them. Their eyes met. Her kindness hit him like a warm wind in winter. His loneliness echoed inside her like a quiet ache. Neither understood why they froze for a moment, staring. But both felt it. A quiet shift. A tiny spark. A path beginning. "Thank you," Richard said, voice low and rough. "It's okay," Mary replied with a soft smile. "Long night?" His throat tightened. "You have no idea." She nodded as though she did understand. And that alone shook something loose inside him. He walked away. She watched him leave. Neither knew that this simple moment, the return of a wallet, would become the anchor of their future. If you saw a stranger walking alone in the cold like Richard, would you stop to help? Tell us in the comments what you would do. Your thoughts matter. Richard Hale had always believed that betrayal came from enemies. He was wrong. It happened on a Thursday morning, ordinary at first glance. The sky over the city was gray, a thin fog lingering between the skyscrapers as Richard rode the elevator to the 48th floor. He reviewed numbers on his tablet, unaware that within the next hour, his entire life would be torn apart. When the elevator doors opened, something felt off. His employees avoided his eyes. The usual greetings were replaced with stiff nods, whispered conversations, and the kind of tense silence that fills a room before a storm breaks. At the door of his office stood Daniel Cooper, his childhood friend, business partner, and the man Richard trusted above all others. Daniel didn't smile. He didn't shake Richard's hand. He simply handed him an envelope. "What's this?" Richard asked. "Proof," Daniel said coldly, "of what you've done." Inside were printed emails, falsified, but Richard didn't know that yet, accusing him of embezzling millions from his own company. Attached were doctored bank statements, anonymous testimonies, and a legal notice freezing his shares. "What is this?" Richard repeated, voice sharper now. "This is a setup." Daniel didn't blink. "The board thinks otherwise. You're suspended as CEO effective immediately." The words slammed into Richard like a physical blow. Security entered the office. 2 guards. "No hesitation. Sir, we need you to come with us." Richard stared at Daniel, searching for the friend he once knew. But Daniel's eyes were empty, cold, victorious. "This isn't real," Richard whispered. "Daniel, why?" Daniel leaned in, voice low enough only Richard could hear. "Because everything you built should have been mine." The truth struck harder than the accusation. Jealousy, envy, years of resentment hidden behind fake loyalty. Richard was escorted out of the office he had built from nothing. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted accusations. Employees he had mentored for years turned their backs. The world he had carefully crafted, protected, and sacrificed for crumbled in a single morning. By that afternoon his accounts were frozen. By evening he was all over the news. By midnight he was homeless, his penthouse sealed off pending investigation. For the first time in decades, Richard walked through the city like a ghost. No destination, no plan, no identity. Rain soaked through his clothes as he wandered, numb, broken, invisible. He sat on a bench near a closed cafe, head in his hands, his expensive suit now ruined by the storm. People passed by without looking at him. Until one person stopped. A young woman with gentle eyes, carrying a grocery bag under one arm. Her name was Mary Luna. "Are you all right?" she asked softly. Richard didn't answer. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his breath shaking. "You look freezing," she continued, lowering her umbrella toward him. "Please take this." No one had offered Richard kindness in years. Not this type, not this genuine. He looked up at her, disbelief in his eyes. Mary smiled. Not out of pity, but compassion. "It's okay," she whispered. "Everyone needs help sometimes." And for the first time since the world crumbled, something inside Richard flickered. Not hope, not yet. Just warmth. Unexpected. Unasked for. And exactly what he needed to breathe again. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights. Richard Hale walked alone, his shoes squelching with each step, his expensive suit sticking to him uncomfortably. He could feel the world closing in. Every headline, every whisper, every stare from strangers was a reminder of how completely his life had unraveled. Mary Luna had followed him at a distance for a few blocks after offering the umbrella. Something in her gut told her he needed help, but something else, perhaps caution, made her stop. She couldn't just waltz into a stranger's pain. Not fully. Richard didn't notice her. He barely noticed anything. The warmth she had offered moments before now felt like a fragile memory fading too quickly. He shivered as the chill of betrayal sank into his bones. Pride, however, kept him from calling for help. He could not, would not, be seen weak. He ducked into a narrow alley to escape the city lights, pressing his back against the cold brick. His hands trembled, not from cold, but from fury and humiliation. The empire he had built, the life he had curated so meticulously, was gone. And yet, deep down, he refused to accept any hand extended in kindness. Mary finally approached, stepping cautiously into the alley. "Sir," she said softly, "please, don't shut yourself out completely. You don't have to face this alone." Richard's head snapped up, his eyes locking onto hers. A flicker of recognition passed over him. The umbrella. The warmth. The kindness he hadn't felt in years. Yet anger and shame swirled like storm clouds in his chest. "I don't need help," he said, voice low, sharp. "I don't want anyone pitying me." Mary took a slow step closer. "This isn't pity," she insisted. "You don't have to carry everything yourself. Sometimes people just need someone to see them." He laughed bitterly, the sound echoing off the alley walls. "See me? Everyone's seen me. Everyone knows my name. They don't see me." Her eyes softened. "Then maybe I can." He wanted to walk away. He wanted to disappear into the night, and let the city swallow him whole. And yet he found himself standing there, staring at her. Something inside him, fragile and raw, resisted the instinct to push her away. But his pride won for now. "I said I don't need anyone," he repeated. Without another word, he turned and walked back into the streets, leaving Mary standing in the alley, silent but determined. She watched him go, her heart aching, but understanding. Sometimes, the first step toward healing had to be taken alone. She knew he would come back. Somehow she just knew. And as Richard disappeared into the night, the first seeds of connection had been planted. A silent promise lingered between them. Unspoken, yet undeniable. If you've ever felt too proud or too ashamed to accept help, what would you do in Richard's shoes? Comment below. We want to hear your thoughts. The next day, the city awoke under a gray sky, the streets still wet from last night's storm. Richard Hale walked with heavy steps through the downtown district, his mind replaying the betrayal over and over. He avoided eye contact with anyone, every glance from a stranger or passerby feeling like judgment. Mary Luna was across the street, balancing a box of supplies for the local shelter where she volunteered. She didn't expect to see him again. Yet when she spotted the familiar figure hunched against the wind, She felt a pull in her chest she didn't quite understand. Suddenly, a car skidded around a corner, spraying a wave of water straight toward Richard. He froze, caught off guard. Without thinking, Mary darted forward, holding her umbrella above him just in time to shield him from the splash. "Watch out," she called. Richard looked at her, soaked and stunned. How did you?" "I've got you," she said simply, her voice firm but kind. There was no time for words after that. They ducked into the nearest doorway, the overhang keeping them dry. Rain dripped from the edges, splashing onto the sidewalk. For a few minutes, silence hung between them, heavy and loaded with meaning. Richard couldn't help but notice how calm she was, how her presence alone seemed to slow the chaos in his mind. And Mary, for her part, couldn't ignore the subtle tremor in his hands, the tension in his jaw, the way his shoulders hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. Finally he spoke. I don't know why you're here again." "I told you yesterday," she replied gently. "Sometimes people just need someone to see them. You were alone." He swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Pride, anger, humiliation. They all screamed at him to walk away. But part of him wanted to stay. To let someone see him as he truly was, stripped of status, wealth, and control. For the first time since the betrayal, Richard felt vulnerable. And he hated it. And he liked it. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the distant rumble of traffic. Richard glanced at her, truly looked at her, and for a moment he considered letting down his guard. He didn't. Not fully. Mary shifted slightly, her voice softer. "You don't have to face this alone, Richard. I mean it." Something in his chest tightened. The truth. He did need help, though admitting it felt impossible. Yet standing there with Mary, something about the storm, the cold, the unexpected shelter, made the idea of trust feel less terrifying. He exhaled slowly, barely audible. "Thank you for yesterday. And for now." Mary gave a small, reassuring smile. "I'll be around. Just remember, you don't have to hide." And with that, they left the doorway together, walking in parallel. Two strangers, yet not entirely strangers anymore. The storm had passed, but its echo remained. The beginning of something fragile, unspoken, and necessary. A bond forming, quietly, under circumstances neither of them could ignore. Have you ever been forced to rely on someone unexpectedly? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear how kindness has changed your life. The next evening, the city had quieted. Rain had washed the streets clean, leaving only the faint smell of wet asphalt and the distant hum of traffic. Richard Hale sat on a bench outside a small cafe, his shoulders slumped, staring at nothing in particular. The events of the past days had drained him, leaving his mind raw, fragile, and exposed. Mary approached slowly, carrying 2 steaming cups of tea from the cafe. She sat beside him without asking, the quiet closeness breaking the barrier he'd built around himself. "I thought you might need this," she said softly, handing him one of the cups. He took it, their fingers brushing briefly, and the simple touch sent an unfamiliar warmth through him. He wasn't sure if it was the tea, the company, or the quiet kindness she offered without expectation. "I don't usually let people in," Richard admitted, his voice low, almost vulnerable. "It's complicated. Trust doesn't come easy when you've been burned the way I have." Mary nodded. "I get that. More than you think." He looked at her curiously. "How? You don't even know me." "I've had my share of people who promised the world and left me with nothing," she said, her gaze soft but firm. "It's hard to trust when you've been let down." Richard studied her, noticing the depth in her eyes, the quiet strength behind her words. For the first time in weeks, he felt the stirrings of understanding, a fragile bridge forming between their two worlds. "I lost everything, my company, my home, my reputation," he confessed. "And it all happened because I trusted the wrong person. Daniel, someone I considered a friend, betrayed me completely." Mary's hand hovered near his, hesitating, before resting lightly on the bench close to him. "That's awful." "I'm sorry," she said. He exhaled slowly. "It's not just business. It's everything. The people I cared about, the life I built gone. And now, I don't know where I fit anymore." For the first time, Richard allowed himself to be silent, the words hanging between them like fragile threads. And Mary, patient and gentle, didn't rush him. She didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. She simply sat there, letting him exist, letting him feel the weight of his pain without judgment. After a long pause, she spoke again. "You're not alone, Alejandro. Even if it feels that way, there are people willing to walk with you. To see you really see you." Something inside him cracked, a part of his pride trembling under the possibility of connection. He wanted to reach for it, for her hand, for the comfort she offered. But fear held him back. Fear of betrayal, fear of loss, fear of letting someone in and having them gone too. Mary tilted her head slightly, as if she could see the walls he was building around himself. "Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing everything," she said softly. "It's learning that someone might actually be trustworthy." Richard's eyes met hers. For the first time he felt a flicker of hope, a dangerous, fragile hope that perhaps he could let someone in again. And though he didn't know how far he was willing to go, or if the world would allow it, in that quiet moment, with the city humming softly around them, he felt a tiny, precious spark of possibility. For the first time in days, he exhaled fully, letting a fraction of his guard down. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? How did you learn to trust again? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. The sun rose the next morning, cutting through the city haze with pale gold light. Richard Hale awoke in a small, modest apartment he had rented for the week, his thoughts still tangled in betrayal, fear, and an unfamiliar flicker of hope. He hadn't expected to feel anything beyond despair. But the memory of Mary's presence lingered, warm and insistent. He found himself walking toward the community center where Mary volunteered, curiosity and an unspoken need driving him. She was there, arranging supplies, moving with quiet efficiency, yet somehow radiating a calm energy that contrasted sharply with the chaos of his life. "Good morning," she said, glancing up and smiling. "Morning," he replied awkwardly. He wasn't used to speaking without tension, without hidden agendas or carefully measured words. She handed him a box of canned goods to help organize. For a moment, they worked side by side in silence. The simple rhythm of shared labor, of hands brushing as they passed items back and forth, was grounding. It reminded Richard of a life not dictated by titles or betrayals. A life where small, meaningful acts mattered more than wealth or power. "Why are you here?" he asked eventually, curiosity breaking the quiet. "Because sometimes helping others helps yourself," she said, smiling softly. "And because you seemed lost yesterday. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Richard paused, feeling a lump in his throat. No one had ever offered such simple, unguarded kindness. Not in decades. Not in any world he knew. You didn't have to," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Maybe not," she replied, her gaze steady. "But I wanted to." For the first time since his life had unraveled, Richard laughed. A small, genuine laugh, unguarded and shaky. Mary chuckled with him, the sound light and infectious. It was the first moment of relief he had allowed himself in weeks. As the day progressed, they shared stories. Not heavy ones, but little pieces of themselves. Richard spoke cautiously about childhood memories, about his parents' high expectations, and the drive that shaped him. Mary talked about her grandmother, about why helping others was a part of her daily life, about her own struggles with trust and hope. By the time the sun began to dip below the skyline, painting the streets in amber light, Richard felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. Peace. Not the false kind he had built through wealth or power, but real, fragile human peace. And with it came a quiet, tentative bond. A connection neither could yet name but both recognized as essential. In that moment, amidst cans and shelves, laughter and quiet understanding, Richard realized that healing was possible. Even if only a little. Have you ever met someone who helped you find hope in a hopeless moment? Share your story in the comments. We want to hear how small acts of kindness changed your life. A week later, the fragile rhythm Richard and Mary had built was shattered in an instant. Richard had begun to trust again, cautiously allowing himself to enjoy Mary's presence, her laughter, her quiet understanding. They shared meals, worked together at the community center, and even spent a few evenings walking through the quiet city streets, talking about everything and nothing. For the first time since his betrayal, he felt a tentative hope that connection and healing were possible. But then came the unexpected blow. One afternoon, a familiar face appeared at the community center. Daniel Whitman, Richard's former business partner. Daniel's expression was smug, calculating. Richard froze, the old flood of anger and fear immediately rising. "Richard," Daniel said smoothly, his tone carrying that chilling familiarity. "I didn't expect to see you here." Mary stepped in front of Richard instinctively. "Who is this?" she asked, protective and cautious. Daniel's eyes flicked to her briefly, a small smirk forming. "Just a friend from the past," he said, but the edge in his tone said otherwise. Richard's heart pounded. Memories of betrayal, humiliation, and the collapse of his life surged forward. Every scar reopened. Every wound burned anew. "You shouldn't be here," Richard said through gritted teeth. "Oh, but I think I should," Daniel replied. "I want to remind you of what you lost, of who you are when you trust the wrong people." Mary glanced at Richard, worry etching her face. She could feel his tension, the invisible walls rising faster than ever. She reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his pride and fear blending into a storm of anger and despair. "Don't touch me," he snapped, the harshness in his voice surprising even himself. Daniel leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Richard to hear. "I won, Richard. You were never as smart as you thought." Richard's hands trembled, his body tense, and in a split second, he lashed out, not physically but verbally, his voice cracking. "You monster! You destroyed everything. You've ruined my life." Daniel laughed, a cold, hollow sound, and walked away, leaving only the echo of his cruelty behind. Richard's knees gave way slightly as he sank to the floor, the weight of the encounter crushing him. Mary knelt beside him, her hands on his shoulders, eyes full of concern. "Richard, talk to me," she whispered. But he couldn't. Words felt impossible. Betrayal had returned with a vengeance, stronger and more vicious than before. He buried his face in his hands, trembling with helpless rage. For the first time he questioned everything. His strength, his worth, even the bond he had begun to form with Mary. Could he allow himself to trust again? Could he allow anyone in when the world had proven so cruel? Mary stayed, silent but present, giving him the space to feel the storm. She didn't speak platitudes or try to fix the pain. She just let him exist in it. And though the moment was devastating, a faint flickering light of connection remained, a fragile ember waiting to be nurtured. But Richard had hit his lowest point. The emotional shatter was complete. Have you ever been blindsided by someone from your past, threatening to destroy your progress? Share your experience in the comments and how you found strength to move forward. The night after Daniel's visit, Richard sat alone in his apartment, the city lights flickering through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. The confrontation had left him raw, his old wounds reopened, and the fragile trust he had begun to build with Mary now felt fragile, almost impossible to hold. He thought of walking away, disappearing into the safety of isolation, letting his pride shield him from further pain. No one could hurt him if he didn't let them in, he reasoned. And yet, the memory of Mary's calm, unwavering presence tugged at his heart like a lifeline. Meanwhile, Mary stood outside, hesitating at his door. She had sensed the storm within him, the struggle between fear and hope. Should she knock? Should she leave him to decide alone? Every instinct told her he needed to choose for himself. Yet she couldn't ignore the silent plea in his eyes from earlier that day. Richard heard the faint tap of her hand on the door. His chest tightened, pride and vulnerability waging war inside him. He could retreat, slam the door, pretend he didn't care. Or he could open it and risk everything, his heart, his trust, his hope. He exhaled long and steady, letting the silence speak louder than words. Finally, he turned the handle and opened the door. Mary's eyes softened, relief barely contained. "Richard." He swallowed, the words heavy in his throat. I don't know if I can do this." "You don't have to know everything right now," she said gently. "You just have to try. That's enough." And in that simple act, Richard realized the choice wasn't about certainty. It wasn't about guarantees. It was about courage, the courage to let someone in, to face vulnerability, to risk heartbreak for the possibility of love. He nodded slowly. "I'll try it with you." Mary reached for his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. The warmth of her touch grounded him. reminding him that hope, though fragile, could be nurtured. The storm of betrayal and fear still lingered, but the path forward was clear. He could either remain alone or choose connection. Together they stepped into the night, hands intertwined, hearts tentative but willing. For the first time, Richard felt the weight of his past lift slightly, not completely, but enough to believe that love, trust, and healing were possible. In that quiet moment, the choice had been made: vulnerability over pride, hope over despair. And it was enough. Have you ever had to choose between pride and vulnerability? How did taking a risk for someone change your life? Share your experience in the comments below. The following morning, sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the community center, casting warm golden beams across the room. Richard Hale arrived early, his steps lighter than they had been in weeks. For the first time since the betrayal, he felt a sense of possibility, small, fragile, but real. Mary was already there, organizing supplies with her usual calm efficiency. When she looked up and saw Richard, her face lit up with a smile that made his chest tighten with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Good morning, she said softly, handing him a clipboard. Morning, he replied, returning her smile. Feeling the connection between them deepen in a way words could not capture. The events of the past week, the betrayal, the fear, the pain, still lingered, but they no longer dominated his life. They had been transformed, absorbed into a broader tapestry that included kindness, trust, and the tentative beginnings of love. Throughout the day, they worked side by side, sharing small jokes, laughter, and quiet moments of understanding. At one point, Richard paused and looked at Mary, the memory of Daniel's betrayal flashing briefly, then dissolving. I almost let everything fall apart again, he admitted quietly. But you helped me see that hope isn't a weakness. It's a choice. Mary reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. And I'll keep helping you as long as you let me, she said. For Richard, that simple gesture carried the weight of redemption and the promise of a new beginning. He realized that love wasn't about perfection or certainty. It was about connection, courage, and vulnerability. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Richard and Mary walked outside together. The city felt different now, alive with possibility. Every street, every corner, no longer reminded him of betrayal, but of resilience and the small, profound ways people can heal one another. Richard turned to Mary, his voice steady and full of quiet determination. Thank you for not giving up on me. Mary smiled, her eyes reflecting the sunset. I never could. Not on you. And in that moment, the fragile, beautiful bond between them solidified. The storm had passed, the past had been acknowledged, and the future stretched ahead. Uncertain, yes, but full of hope, trust, and the promise of love at last. Richard and Mary continued walking, hands entwined, hearts open. The world was wide and unpredictable, but together, they had found their way back to light. Have you ever found hope and love after betrayal? Share your story in the comments and inspire someone else to believe in second chances. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. Your time, your support, and your presence here mean more than words can say. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or kept you watching, please make sure to subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories like this one. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a new upload. Until next time, stay blessed, stay strong, and keep believing in love. See you in the next story.